China is clearly the leader. My own research, for example, shows that China generates automotive patents and have for the past decade at a rate of about 5 to 1 over the US. There's nothing about the US auto industry that suggests that it is going to be a global leader going forward.
Canada just crossed a line that almost no country has dared to cross in front of Donald Trump's political shadow, and it did so calmly, strategically, and with full confidence in its own future. While American automakers struggle under Trump's tariffs and collapsing production, Canada is openly debating something that would have been unthinkable 10 years ago, pivoting toward China's ascendant electric vehicle industry and stepping away from the U.S. auto giants that once dictated the direction of this country. What makes this moment historic is not the shift itself, but the attitude behind it. Ottawa is no longer reacting out of fear or economic dependence. For the first time in decades, Canada sees the U.S. auto industry not as an anchor for stability, but as a risk, a sector falling behind in technology, supply chains, and global competitiveness. And that realization is sending shockwaves through Washington.
The turning point began when Stellantis abruptly pulled its Jeep Compass production out of Brampton and moved it to the United States. Instead of silently accepting the decision, Ottawa launched a formal dispute resolution process, a rare and unusually assertive move that signals a new posture toward American automakers. In another era, Canada would have swallowed the loss, not this time. At the same moment, the U.S.-China trade war escalated to one of its most volatile phases in years. Washington's new tariffs on Chinese EVs and components pushed U.S. automakers into deeper instability. Reuters reported that production cuts across American plants reached levels as high as 20,000 vehicles per day, creating ripples throughout North American supply chains. Against this backdrop, Canada quietly reopened high-level diplomatic channels with Beijing. After Prime Minister Mark Carney met President Xi Jinping at APEC 2025, China restored Canada to its approved travel list and signaled openness to resolving long-standing disputes on canola and, crucially, on electric vehicles. At the same time, experts like Professor Greg Mordew of McMaster University began stating openly that China, not the United States, is now the global leader in automotive technology and patent production. His conclusion was blunt. If Canada wants a competitive automotive future, it must engage with the world's new center of innovation. That statement landed like a thunderclap in U.S. political circles.
And there's nothing about the U.S. industrial policy measures or the energy policy measures that suggest that continuing to try to tether our industry to the U.S. industry is the best bet.
For more than half a century, the U.S. enjoyed unquestioned dominance over the Canadian auto sector. But that dominance is cracking, not because Canada is turning away, but because the U.S. industry is losing its competitive edge. Under Trump's second-term tariff regime, supply chains have become unpredictable, costs have surged, and manufacturers across the U.S. have warned of significant production risks. Detroit, once the world's automotive powerhouse, is no longer setting the pace. Meanwhile, China is producing nearly 10 million electric vehicles annually, outpacing the US, Europe, and Japan combined. It files 5 times more automotive patents than the United States every single year. And while Washington pours billions into protectionism, Beijing pours billions into research, scale, and next-generation technology. Canada is watching this divergence closely, and the conclusion is becoming undeniable. The future of global automotive leadership is emerging in Asia, not America. What Canada is recognizing today is an economic truth that industry insiders have understood for a long time. The U.S. is no longer the world leader in cars, batteries, or electrification. North America's EV adoption is moving slower than Europe and dramatically slower than China. American automakers, facing tariff wars and political uncertainty, are cutting production, delaying EV investments, and shifting manufacturing strategies month by month. For Canada, this creates a dangerous dependency. If the U.S. continues to fall behind, Canada, historically tied to U.S. auto cycles, risks being dragged down with it. That's why Carney's government is reconsidering old assumptions and looking for partners who can actually support Canada's long-term industrial goals. Partnering with China does not mean embracing China politically. It means recognizing where the innovation is, where the engineering is advancing fastest, and where the automotive future is genuinely being built. This is not an ideological shift. It is a strategic one.
No move threatens Trump more than the idea of Canada buying EVs from China instead of the United States. For decades, American automakers have relied on Canada as their stabilizing market, a guaranteed customer base that absorbed inventory and helped offset domestic downturns. But if Chinese EVs enter Canada at lower prices, with superior range, and with technology that U.S. automakers are still years away from matching, that entire model collapses. Such a shift would break the American monopoly overnight. It would lower vehicle prices across Canada, shift supply chains toward Asia, and undermine Trump's leverage in every trade negotiation. Trump has already floated the idea of 100% tariffs on Chinese imports, hoping to pressure Canada into resisting Chinese EVs. But the reality is that Canada is done letting Washington dictate what technologies it can or cannot adopt. The tariff chaos of 2025 made that perfectly clear. Trump broke the auto system that once sustained North America. Canada is now building something new.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has been consistent from the beginning. Canada will not chain its future to a declining industrial model. Instead, it will choose partnerships based on innovation, resilience, and Canadian national interest. By re-engaging with China, strengthening ties with Europe, and looking to ASEAN for growth, Canada is reshaping itself into a globally connected middle power, not an appendage of American industrial strategy. This is one of the first times a close U.S. ally has taken such an explicit step toward industrial independence. And ironically, it was Trump's own economic aggression that pushed Canada in this direction. Canada is no longer asking what Washington wants. It is asking what Canada needs. That shift in mindset is powerful. It is also irreversible.
Canada is not choosing China over the United States. It is choosing the future over the past. By exploring Chinese EV partnerships, challenging Stellantis, and refusing to let Trump dictate the terms of North American manufacturing, Canada is stepping into a new era of sovereignty, confident, self-directed, and globally engaged. The real question now is how far this pivot will go. Will Canada open the door fully to Chinese EVs and break a century-long dependency on Detroit? Will Trump escalate further? Or will the U.S. finally confront its own industrial stagnation? And above all, is this the moment Canada begins building an automotive future defined not by American expectations, but by Canadian ambition?
With a report saying that Mark Carney will talk with Xi Jinping on Friday.
I think for Prime Minister Carney, it's important because he wants to recalibrate the relationship with China, and he wants to open up high-level dialogue. He essentially wants to say that Canada wants to have a relationship that allows us to advance some of our interests, particularly around trade and commercial relations.
On the eve of the APEC summit in Jeonju, South Korea, the world's eyes are once again fixed on Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. Their meeting tomorrow is expected to dominate headlines, as both sides search for a fragile ceasefire in a trade war that has shaken global markets. But away from that spotlight, another leader has already made quiet progress. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney arrived in Asia earlier this month, and by the time he reached APEC, he had already secured one major win: a breakthrough at the ASEAN summit in Malaysia that opened new economic doors for Canada. Now, as he prepares to meet Xi Jinping tomorrow, Carney stands on firmer ground. His government has begun rebuilding Canada's presence in Asia while maintaining its independence between the U.S. and China.
Carney's appearance at the ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur, October 26th to 28th, 2025, marked Canada's most active engagement with Southeast Asia in years. According to Global Affairs Canada, the Prime Minister met with several regional counterparts, including the leaders of Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines. The discussions focused on energy cooperation, digital trade, and supply chain resilience, key themes of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. Malaysia's Trade Ministry confirmed that both sides agreed to expand cooperation in liquefied natural gas, LNG, and clean energy technology, part of a wider effort to help ASEAN transition away from coal. Ottawa also opened exploratory talks with the Philippines on a potential bilateral trade framework, following Manila's recent push to attract Western investment. ASEAN represents a market of more than 600 million people, with a combined GDP above $3.6 trillion and an average growth rate of around 5%, World Bank 2025. For Carney, the region offers not just export opportunities, but strategic breathing room, a chance to diversify away from dependence on the United States without falling into Beijing's sphere. Observers noted that Carney's message was clear. The country is ready to be a constructive economic partner in Asia, bringing energy, technology, and finance without forcing nations to pick sides. For many Southeast Asian leaders, that approach was a welcome contrast to the zero-sum politics of Washington and Beijing. By the time Carney left Kuala Lumpur for South Korea, Canada had positioned itself as a reliable new player in the region's economic future, and that momentum would soon carry into APEC.
Carney's next challenge comes tomorrow at APEC, where he is scheduled to meet Xi Jinping on October 31, their first formal conversation since Canada and China fell into a tariff battle in late 2024. That dispute began when Ottawa imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, mirroring the Trump administration's policy to shield its auto industry. Beijing retaliated swiftly with its own 100% duties on Canadian canola oil and further taxes on peas and pork. Agriculture Canada's August 2025 report estimated a combined impact of $2.35 billion USD in canola losses, $637 million USD in peas, and $468 million USD in pork. Numbers that echoed the 2019-2020 crisis that paralyzed prairie farm exports. Beijing enters this meeting confident, believing it holds the upper hand as U.S. tariffs continue to strain Western markets. But Carney arrives better prepared than any Canadian leader in recent years. His success at ASEAN gives him a fresh narrative. Canada is not isolated nor desperate. It has options. Canadian officials say Ottawa will press Beijing to lift agricultural tariffs and reopen access for canola exports. In exchange, Canada may consider reviewing EV import restrictions once fair competition and environmental standards are in place. The meeting also carries a powerful political subtext. For years, Canadian leaders have struggled to balance economic pragmatism with growing concerns over human rights and national security in dealings with China. Carney's team is walking that fine line again, re-engaging Beijing economically without backing away from Canada's values. Officials say the talks will focus strictly on trade and agriculture, leaving sensitive security issues for later channels. This approach reflects Carney's broader philosophy of principled pragmatism: engage when it serves the national interest, but set clear boundaries when it touches sovereignty. Domestically, his stance has drawn mixed reactions. Prairie farm groups welcome any progress with China, while opposition lawmakers warn against becoming too dependent on a partner known for economic coercion. Economists note that Canada's exports to China still total about 29.9 billion Canadian dollars a year, Statistics Canada 2024. So even a partial reopening could deliver tangible benefits to rural communities. In that sense, the stakes are both political and personal, a test of whether Carney can turn diplomatic restraint into economic relief. No immediate breakthrough is expected,
but officials close to the talks say both sides see value in starting a structured dialogue after years of mistrust. If that happens, tomorrow's meeting could mark the first step toward normalization. Carney's approach embodies a broader philosophy, autonomy through engagement. Rather than choosing between the United States and China, Ottawa is building a web of relationships that anchors Canada in multiple regions at once. In East Asia, Canada has deepened critical minerals ties with Japan and South Korea. In Europe, the August 2025 EU agreement opened clean energy investment worth about $600 billion USD, European Commission data. And in Southeast Asia, the Kuala Lumpur agreements have positioned Canada as a new partner for energy and infrastructure projects across the region. Each step reduces Canada's exposure to tariff wars and political pressure. It also shows a different kind of leadership, quiet, pragmatic, and anchored in long-term stability instead of short-term headlines. At a time when the United States demands alignment and China seeks influence, Carney's Canada is demonstrating that middle powers can exercise real agency by choosing partnership over submission. As the sun sets over Gyeongju tonight, the spotlight still belongs to Trump and Xi. Their meeting tomorrow will fill the front pages and rattle the markets. But Mark Carney's story is unfolding in a different tone, one of steady diplomacy and strategic patience. He arrives at APEC with new momentum from ASEAN and a measured plan for Beijing. Whatever comes of tomorrow's talks, Canada has already regained its voice in Asia. In an era defined by noise and division, Carney's quiet strategy reminds the world that power isn't always about volume. It's about consistency, credibility, and the ability to build bridges when others burn them. While others fight for dominance, Canada quietly fights for relevance and may have just secured both.
You have Canada. It's so great to have, in fact, the president called and he wanted to know if it's worthwhile. He knew exactly what it was. He knew the importance. Where's Canada, by the way? Where are you? Where are you? And I appreciate you being here very much, Mr. President. Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks. So you going back?
I'll go back. I'm glad you upgraded me to president.
Did I say?
At a summit in Egypt, cameras caught a moment that said more than any speech could. As Donald Trump addressed world leaders, he casually referred to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney as the President of Canada. The room went silent for a beat before laughter rippled through the crowd. Carney, calm and composed, smiled and replied that he was glad to be upgraded. It was a light moment on the surface, but underneath it told a deeper story. The United States, once the anchor of global leadership, now looked distracted and defensive. The scene captured how Washington's influence is beginning to slip while others quietly move forward. That exchange wasn't about humor. It reflected how much the global balance has changed. While Trump continues to govern through tariffs and confrontation, his allies are learning to adapt without him. And nowhere is that more visible than in the shifting trade map now surrounding the United States. By mid-October 2025, Washington's tariff spiral had started to rebound on itself. Trump's new 100% duties on Chinese goods triggered a wave of countermeasures far beyond Beijing. China not only expanded its rare earth export limits, but also coordinated quietly with other suppliers, from Indonesia to Kazakhstan, to tighten the flow of battery metals and refined nickel. Within days, global prices for key minerals used in electric vehicles rose nearly 30%, according to the London Metal Exchange. Across the Pacific, U.S. allies began signaling fatigue. Japan and South Korea, both recently pressured to sign investment-heavy trade frameworks with Washington, openly called for predictable and rules-based trade. The European Commission warned that American protectionism was now a systemic risk to global recovery. For manufacturers worldwide, the shock was immediate. German automakers slowed exports to the U.S. Korean chip makers redirected orders toward India, and ASEAN economies expanded intra-Asian trade to insulate themselves from U.S. volatility. Even inside America, frustration grew. The National Retail Federation reported that import costs on consumer goods had jumped 14% since summer, while the Federal Reserve noted continued pressure on inflation despite slower demand. What was intended as a show of strength has become a global rallying point against U.S. tariffs. Instead of bending others to Washington's will, Trump's trade policy is driving them to unite and to trade more with each other. While the U.S. became trapped in multiple trade fights, Canada quietly redrew its own map of alliances. After months of tense talks with Washington that produced no relief on steel, aluminum, or autos, Ottawa moved on to new partnerships. In New Delhi, Canada and India signed a new roadmap for relations in early October 2025. The agreement restarted cooperation on critical minerals, renewable energy, and technology after years of frozen ties. India's Foreign Ministry confirmed the relaunch of the Canada-India Joint Science and Technology Committee and a revived CEO Forum to facilitate cross-border investment. This deal marks the first real thaw since diplomatic tensions in 2023. For Canada, it opens a gateway into South Asia at a time when global manufacturers are shifting supply chains away from China and the U.S. At the same time, Ottawa began to reassess its economic stance with Beijing. Canada should reopen talks with China, especially after Chinese officials offered to lift tariffs on Canadian canola and agricultural goods if Ottawa allowed electric vehicle imports. Those vehicles, priced around 35,000 Canadian dollars, could make Canada's EV market more competitive and lower costs for consumers. Domestically, the Carney government also launched a major industrial program. Industry Minister Melanie Joly's $5 billion plan aims to rebuild manufacturing capacity in clean technology, battery metals, and advanced materials. Ontario, still reeling from U.S. auto tariffs, is leveraging its cheap energy and abundant nickel and cobalt to attract new investment. These steps signal a turning point. Canada is not waiting for Washington's approval anymore. It is diversifying its trade base, expanding eastward toward Asia and southward toward emerging markets. As one Canadian analyst put it this week, while Washington is building tariff walls, Ottawa is quietly building bridges. Trump's tariff experiment was designed to make America strong again. Instead, it has pushed allies away and strengthened the very competitors Washington wanted to contain. The United States is now surrounded by a network of former partners: Canada, the EU, India, Japan, who are rewriting their trade relationships without American leadership. Each of these economies is deepening cooperation in areas once dominated by the U.S.: clean energy, automotive supply chains, and critical minerals. According to the World Trade Organization's latest briefing, global tariff retaliation against U.S. measures now covers over 40% of American exports. The cost is spreading back through U.S. industries, from furniture to heavy machinery. In Michigan and Ohio, where factories rely on Canadian steel, operating margins have fallen by double digits since August. Even Wall Street has taken notice. Analysts at Goldman Sachs estimate that American consumers now shoulder about 55% of all tariff costs through higher prices, a number consistent with patterns seen during the 2018 trade war. Meanwhile, Canada's approach of diversification is beginning to pay off. With new energy and technology partnerships in India and ongoing talks with China, Ottawa has positioned itself as a bridge between Western and Asian markets. Foreign direct investment in Canada rose nearly 9% this quarter, according to Statistics Canada. For the first time in decades, the economic gravity of North America is shifting north of the border. Trump's America First now risks becoming America Alone. The tariffs that were meant to protect domestic industry are driving companies to relocate production and diversify supply chains elsewhere. The symbolism of that moment in Egypt comes full circle. A president mistook a prime minister for another head of state, and the world laughed. But behind the laughter was a recognition that something fundamental had changed. America is no longer the unquestioned center of global trade. Its closest neighbors have learned to compete, and its rivals have learned to cooperate. Trump's tariffs were never just about economics. They were about power. And now, that power is turning inward. leaving room for others, Canada included, to lead in ways Washington no longer can.
The country would rather not have to pay $100,000, but they'd rather, how do you do that? You hire Americans.
Amid headlines about tariffs, lawsuits, and fears of mounting economic damage, President Donald Trump has made yet another bold move, one that critics warn could push billions of dollars in investment away from the United States. In the middle of this storm, he stood at the White House and unveiled a pair of executive orders. The first created the so-called Trump Gold Card, a $1 million shortcut to U.S. citizenship. The second slapped a $100,000 fee on skilled worker visas, known as H-1Bs. What was sold as a patriotic defense of American jobs is already being read abroad as a signal that Washington is becoming unpredictable, costly, and harder to trust.
The president signing a proclamation that now requires this $100,000 annual fee for this H-1B visa for highly skilled foreign workers. Now, this could be a huge blow to big tech firms that rely heavily on highly skilled foreign workers to fill key roles.
For decades, the H-1B visa has been one of the few channels for companies to bring top engineers and scientists into the United States. Yet approval rates already hovered near 20%. By adding such a steep fee, Washington is turning a tool meant to strengthen America's role in technology into a barrier that deters both workers and employers. Trump frames this as protection for U.S. graduates, but abroad it looks like a government sending mixed signals to the very innovators it claims to need. The headline says protecting American jobs, but the reality is different. With supply chains shifting and nations competing for capital, raising the cost of entry risks making the United States look less like the obvious place to build, hire, and invest. The controversy deepened in early September when Immigration and Customs Enforcement carried out a raid at Hyundai and LG Energy Solution construction site in Georgia. More than 300 South Korean engineers and technicians were detained. None were charged with a crime. Images of workers in chains and handcuffs returning to Seoul with only government-issued plastic bags for belongings spread quickly across global news networks.
So now the question turns to, what are all these companies going to do, Brian, that are here in South Korea, that have future projects in the United States? They do not want anything like this happening to their employees.
From the perspective of companies, they will be concerned about disadvantageous treatment or facing difficulties when they're building factories in the United States. That could probably have a significant impact on direct investment in the U.S. in the future.
The South Korean president warned openly that such treatment of investors and employees could have a significant impact on future foreign direct investment into the United States. For families watching their sons and fathers escorted off planes, the sense of humiliation was real. And for executives preparing to spend billions building clean energy plants in America, the signal was equally powerful. This was not the image of a country welcoming partners. It was a warning that rules could shift overnight and allies could be treated as adversaries. When paired with the H-1B crackdown, the picture grows clearer. The United States is telling the world that entry for both capital and talent is conditional, costly, and politically volatile. Far from securing American jobs, this combination risks driving opportunity elsewhere.
North of the border, Canada is positioning itself as the reliable partner in a turbulent time. The federal government has rolled out investment tax credits for clean technology, battery supply chains, and advanced manufacturing. These include a 30% credit for clean tech equipment and additional support for EV supply chain projects. Canada is also using its advantage in abundant clean electricity and a workforce of skilled graduates to attract new factories and labs. At the same time, Ottawa has tightened reviews of foreign investment in sensitive sectors such as critical minerals. That balance allows Canada to offer a fast track for projects that create jobs in renewable energy or high-value manufacturing while showing caution where national security is at stake. For global investors, the comparison is becoming obvious. Where the U.S. now risks reputational damage and operational delays, Canada is selling stability, predictability, and partnership.
Trump's intention was to safeguard employment for American workers. Yet the ripple effect of high visa fees and headline-grabbing raids is that trusted allies now hesitate. Instead of encouraging new investment, these moves suggest that America is closing its doors at the very moment when supply chains are being redrawn. For Canada, this is not just a window of opportunity. It is a chance to capture projects that might have landed south of the border. By presenting itself as steady and welcoming, Ottawa is turning the turbulence in Washington into momentum for its own economy. Trump's visa gamble was meant to strengthen the United States. The reality is that it risks pushing global capital and talent northward, where Canada stands ready to receive them.